Right on Crime organization that's out there saying, hey, the right end of the political spectrum's got this. Grover Norquist looks at it from the financial side. For Republicans, it's the financial side of the thing that makes a lot of sense, but also the family side of it. And it's a very compassionate thing to do, but it's also a very smart thing to do. So, a lot of progress, but listen to what we're also saying. The first step, this is the first step, because there's so many other things that also need to happen.
Congressman, this issue, as you noted, has a lot of bipartisan support. You named a lot of organizations and persons, from the Freedom Caucus to the most progressive person in Congress. Why is that? Why does this make sense to Congresspersons and the legislators across the aisle? Why does it make sense to them?
I probably worry less about that side. I worry about the people that think they want to stick their chest out and naively say, I got to be the toughest guy in the room, you know? And quite frankly, he's a good friend of mine, but Tom Cotton, the senator from Arkansas, just is totally opposed to this. But doesn't really, I would argue, doesn't really have a good rational argument against it. And we got to be able to fight back on that. I think there are multiple ways to attack that. The finances, we can't afford it. Okay, so if you're a fiscal conservative, that should be important to you. If you profess that you're a religious type of person, there should be some compassion in you that you should be able to tap into. If you're a person who says, hey, we've got to make sure that people are serving their sentences. Okay, well then let's talk about victims' rights. I'm happy to do that. But then let's also talk about how do we actually solve this problem? Because guess what? That person, no matter what you say, they're coming back out. Do you want there to be more victims or less victims? And what these states can do, and what I'm excited about, is these states documenting. And Judge Casey talked about this. You've got to be able to have the metrics to make the case to say, and I don't know what the number is. If your recidivism rate is here, guess where it went to the next part. But I think it's going to get there, and I think the atmosphere is right to do it right now. Right in a lame duck session, some people would advocate there should be no lame duck sessions. There's always been a lame duck session. There's probably going to continue to be one. One of your congressmen from Kentucky thinks that there shouldn't be any, and I love the guy, but he's wrong. And part of what they should be able to do is wipe that away and be able to say, let's do this. And to his credit, I think President Trump has been great on this, and Barack Obama was great on it. If you can get those two people agreeing that these types of things need to happen, the atmosphere is right, but people need to demand it. And that's where I get excited to see so many law students involved, because you're the thought leaders and the thought leaders of the future. If you're talking about it and excited about it and pushing your members of Congress on it, I did hundreds of town hall meetings in my 8.5 years in Congress. Never once did I have anybody raise their hand and say, tell me what you're doing about criminal justice reform. It always had to be in my prepared remarks to say, this is important and this is why it's important. You have to be the ones to say, this is important. And this is why, and please, I beg you, if you want to attack a Democrat or you want to attack a Republican, this is not that issue, okay? There's plenty of things. I'll give you a list of them where all the Democrats are wrong. I've got a list of them. I was doing pretty well till then. I'm just teasing. But this is one where you've got to be able to cite and bring people together and say, this is why we're going to do this, and this is why it's smart.
It's late and it's hot. This is not filled with questions. I'm going to ask Congressman Chaffetz one more question. I'm going to ask the panel, each person, to give us an answer to one question. But before I do that, one of the things we're really proud of in Kentucky is our judiciary. And we have 3 judges here tonight. I want to, when I say your name, if you raise your hand or stand so I can we recognize. Judge Denise Brown is here. Thank you for coming, Judge. Judge Ogden is here as well. Thank you, Judge. Judge Derwin Webb, thank you for coming. Public Defender Dan Goyette and Leo Smith are also here. And Leo's a constituent of mine, so I love you more than almost everybody else. My mama didn't raise no fool. Okay, last question. Congressman Chaffetz, you know the congressional game and you know the inside of baseball better than anybody else, or as well as anybody else. What are the chances of the First Step Act? What are the chances of the next second step passing?
I think the atmosphere right now is better than it's ever been. Somewhere after the midterm election and the end of December, The Senate is going to, I think, offer a couple other amendments. The other key player here, obviously Mitch McConnell, your senator here, is pivotal to this, but so is John Cornyn. John Cornyn, senator from Texas, former attorney general, and also been a great advocate in pushing this forward. This is something that he personally wants to see move forward as well. He is the whip in the Senate. The House has already proven it. The House has already demonstrated that they can put up the votes. That gives strength to the Senate to actually do something, but they'll send it back over. It may be coupled into another package, that doesn't matter. It just ultimately has to get passed. And then it's gotta create this atmosphere so we can start to tackle these other things and start to get after changing the name and putting money towards, because I ultimately believe it saves money, but how the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, scores things is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. That's a whole nother symposium about how to change budgeting in this country. But that's the thing that needs to happen so that we can understand that putting money into these programs like education in prisons and work release programs and other types of things saves the federal government and saves the saves the taxpayers money. That's what needs to happen next. But better than it's ever been, and I can't tell you enough how much Brett Tolman and Greg, what they've been doing in lobbying Congress and getting everybody on an untold number of meetings. He is a pivotal player here, as much as anybody up here.
All right, last question, and this is for everyone. It's a little bit different what I'm gonna ask Sadiqa because she's local, and I'm gonna start local. My question is, we've had the dignity bill. Representative Moser sitting here. She introduced a very, I think, reasonable omnibus bill to improve Kentucky's criminal justice system. What do you want to see Kentucky do next? What should we do?
Well, I want to see fewer people incarcerated. Again, I think that is absolutely important. So we've got to have real reform that starts with more than just sentencing. It's a matter of what we are incarcerating for. I want us to focus in on mental health treatment for folks who we know are really sick and should not be incarcerated at all. We've got to do something better. Our local jail system should not be the largest detox facility in the city. We have to in the state. We have to think about that. I'd like to see automatic restoration of civil rights immediately in Kentucky. When somebody has served their time, their rights ought to be restored immediately. I think that's important. Given the work that we just did on the Riley Reentry Project with some of our partners in the city, I'd like to see automatic expungements. It should not cost anything. I understand that oftentimes the court will waive costs if you have someone in a situation where they can't afford it, but we are not waiving the KSP reports. There's still other costs that go with that, legal fees. So I think those kinds of things are important. I'd like to see us reform our juvenile justice system significantly. We've got to think about what it looks like to incarcerate children and what really are we benefiting? Are we really talking about correction? And how do we do that? I think we in Kentucky have got to have more of this working across aisles and I think you're really trying to do that, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you having me here. I think though that we cannot continue to have these very siloed conversations about one part of the system and think that we are really going to be able to fix what is broken. There are some societal things that we will have to work on, but those things that I've listed are really important. I think we should have votes immediately. As far as I'm concerned, people should be able to vote in custody, and there are states that do that. I mean, you cannot lose your every right because you are incarcerated. It doesn't. You still are going to come home. People are going to serve. They're going to be out, and I think it's important for us to treat people with dignity every step of the way. And so I think in Kentucky we are way behind on voting rights and those sorts of things for folks who pay their dues to society, and we've got to stop that. I appreciate the conversation around, the money savings. What we don't talk about is the cost of parents being separated from their children and what that looks like on the system when you have children that are left without parents, sometimes for much longer periods oftentimes for much longer periods than necessary. So I want us to look at the entire continuum of our system and recognize, and we must recognize this, how poverty impacts that system. What are we really willing to invest in order to prevent people from being, from committing crimes, sometimes being charged with things that they have not committed, sometimes being overcharged, and then even over incarcerated. We have to acknowledge that this country, this wonderful country that we love so much, we are incarcerating people at a higher rate than any other country in the world. And there's something the matter with that. And so we've got to have some much deeper discussion.
Sadiq, I agree with almost everything you say. I'm gonna take moderator's privilege and say, before that, we need to stop doing bad before we can do good. Maybe we can do it at the same time. For instance, the gang bill was atrocious.
Yeah.
And we passed that this year. We must stop doing bad immediately. Okay, let's go on to the federal guys. Brett, First Step Act, it passes. We're good to go. The president signs it. Second step, what is it?
There are 33,000+ criminal statutes on the federal side. There are, some estimate, between 300,000 and 400,000 civil regulations that have criminal penalties. I'd like to change us from a over-criminalizing society. I don't think the federal system was ever supposed to be this robust in terms of its criminal statutes. When President Reagan was the president, I think there were something like 4,000 criminal statutes. Between then and now, there's 34,000. So tell me what we value as a society. I get that punishment is important, and it is vital. But the next step, I think, in the criminal justice system is looking at those statutes. Let's get rid of the ones. If anyone ever follows on Twitter the crime of the day, if you ever follow that, it brings out some of these absurd cases. Like if you travel from Kentucky to Utah and you have a burlap sack, you could be prosecuted federally. Let's clean up our federal criminal statutes. And then I also want to see mens rea is important. We need to start addressing, when I went to criminal law in law school, I was always told you had to have, criminal mental state in order to be convicted of a crime. You had to have the criminal intent. There are many statutes right now where we don't really pay attention or seem to care whether or not the individual had criminal intent. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that we address a lot of the front-end changes that are malfunctions in the law, but the criminal justice system, I'd like to take some intelligent people, I know you're out there, study the statutes, give us some changes, let's change the federal system so it's not such a criminal state, and let's get back to a more balanced, healthy approach, even in criminal justice.
Good. I will say that we Kentuckians support the criminalization of burlap sacks. Because your sack got to be made out of Kentucky hemp. Congressman Chafik, same question.
A couple things have to happen. You need to reward, recognize members of Congress that are willing to take on this issue. When you have town hall meetings, when you have other things, you need to ask them about these issues. If you don't ask them about these issues, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, okay? If you don't continue to press on this, then it just gets fade away. It's like, well, we did that. They did that. And mostly because most of the members are naive to it. They don't pay attention to it because they never get asked the question. That way they don't get briefed on it. That's just the political reality of it. You got a handful of people in Congress that are paying attention to this topic. But we like to say, Congress, we don't like to say it, but it's a reality. You're about 7 miles wide, about a ½ inch deep. If you think of all the things that come in front of a member of Congress, it's ridiculous. Federal government is too pervasive. That's in part why I'm a conservative. We should do certain things and do them well, but the reality is we're doing everything, and it's too much. Okay, so you gotta recognize and push this issue. Number two, I think we have to address the issue of mental health. Our law enforcement, the first line of defense, and the people that show up in an ambulance or an EMT, they're dealing with this every day, and they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do, and they don't get the treatment. Now, that's not going to be necessarily solved at the federal level. This is going to be a local county issue on how we deal with mental health in this country. It overlaps into the gun issue. It overlaps into a whole lot of things. But we don't deal with the mental health issues in this country very well. We don't diagnose them early, and we don't get them the treatment that they need, and consequently it ends up it just gets punted and punted again, because it's a very difficult, sensitive issue to deal with. There are lots of other aspects of it. Mens rea is the one thing that, I'm just being candid here, that starts to separate Democrats and Republicans. My personal view, having been through this and sat in the room, is that the environmental lobby doesn't want to see a change. They are the ones that are pushing the Democrats to say no. And there are lots of cases out there where people broke environmental law and they didn't recognize that that was even a law and got incarcerated, and the environmentalists like this, okay? And I think it's a problem, and it's one of the issues that does separate us, the Democrats and the Republicans, and it has to be addressed. But there's so much more that they can. And I think the other thing that probably doesn't get enough attention to attract a lot of good people is we've got to talk also about victims' rights and the notification and all those things that go along with it. Because if we're just out there saying, hey, we're going to reduce sentences and let people out of prison, then you're going to start to have the ads like they did on Michael Dukakis in 1988, the Willie Horton ad, where somebody's going to go out and do something stupid and kill somebody, and it'll scare politicians for the next decade or two. And so there's got to be a balance there to try to figure that out, hold hands together, and keep making progress so that we're incarcerating the worst. We were talking about this earlier. There is a certain element that needs tougher sentences. They need longer sentences. They should never get out, okay? But for the overwhelming majority of people who have a drug addiction, and they're just trying to feed that, they got an opioid crisis, it all falls in together. That we have to tackle together, and that would, I think, have the biggest impact on the system.
Mr. McCabe, with your patent cleanup, same question to you to clear the bases.
Okay, I agree. I mean, obviously, part of the problem with batting cleanup is that when everybody else has spoken, it's kind of hard to come up with something.
Especially for a Yankee fan.
That's right. I remember being at a conference and there were a bunch of speakers got up and somebody passed me a note and said, everything that has to be said has already been said. And the note went back, yes, but not everybody has said it. In addition to trimming the federal criminal code, and by the way, there's actually no reliable number that anybody can, including the Library of Congress, can tell you about the number of criminal statutes and regulations that there are. It's that bad. But I think what it's ultimately going to sell, the things that we've been talking about principally here, is recidivism rates. And that's why I think the importance of data is enormous. If you can lower recidivism rates, any program that works to do that is going to sell with people. Any program that doesn't isn't. And we need to develop ways of measuring that. We need to publicize the programs that do work and make sure they spread. And that I think is key to getting the votes behind it.
To all our sponsors, thank you. To all the people who've come, thank you. Let's give a round of applause for Ken.
Oh, I've lost 5 pounds. First of all, I want to thank our team. We had the most beautiful set ready for you all. It sort of looked like that screen over there, and
Not like this.
lined in gold. No, I'm joking. But really, a beautiful setup over at the University Club, and the staff over there had some amazing food, some mini hot browns, mini derby pies, like top shelf liquor. I don't know.